Hello, my name is Blake Christopherson. I am in the sex crimes class, and my case study is on indecent exposure. Indecent exposure is a complicated issue, and like with the Second Amendment and gun rights, there are people who are conflicted by the laws and policies regarding this issue. Some of the people who commit indecent exposure do it to violate the rights of someone else, and others are labeled as sex offenders just because they needed to urinate on the side of the road, and that can be a problem because it seems like a wrongful conviction when they're not trying to create a problem on its own. Indecent exposure is the act of showing oneself to the world outside of privacy norms like a bathroom or your own home. A lot of people have been arrested for flashing their private parts to women, children, and anyone who feels violated seeing it. Some concerns revolve around public urination, and I agree, urinating in public, in the view of anyone, really can cause for concern, but let's say for someone who is driving and pulls over to the side of the road and tries their best to cover and not let anyone be aware that they are using the toilet. If a police officer were to pull in behind you or even pass by and witness the exposure unnecessarily, this can cause the person to receive a sex offending charge based on the situation, circumstance, and the discretion of the officer. My personal issue with this is, as a diabetic, I have high blood sugar and frequent urination problems, and since I can't just use a bottle when I'm driving, and there might not be a place to pull over where there's a bathroom, I have admittedly pulled over on the side of the road to relieve myself. Knowing that this can cause me to get a sex offending charge is scary, but what am I going to do? Urinate in the car? That would be completely unethical and potentially dangerous. This is where they should reform the law, where if you have a good reason and are hiding it and not purposely exposing yourself to anyone, the charge or act of the crime should be dismissed. Thankfully, I've always pulled over to a secluded area to do this, and I have never been pulled over or investigated by a police officer for something like this, and I don't think people should, depending on where you are and what type of property you do it on. However, there's a large number of predators and sex offenders and molesters who expose themselves often, and that is a line a person should not cross, as not only is it a breach of the law, but it also violates other people's rights as well. Some, depending on what state or even what officer judge you end up with, may give someone a different charge than others. There's some statistics that show punishments for certain people who commit this crime. As you can see in the graph, the Let's Talk graph, sentencing statistics for an intentional sexual exposure in a public space, you can see more than 50% are arrested for this crime, but we don't know how much of that 54.5% were wrongly convicted or convicted for indecent exposure that was unintentional or nonviolent, like urination. Less than 1% were discharged or dismissed, which is an incredibly low discharge rate for this crime. Community corrections and paying a fine seem like an accurate percentage just because this does seem like a very finable offense, depending on the severity of indecent exposure. The people who got the corrections and paying fines was only about, let me zoom in real quick, 27.7% for corrections, and fines was 17.4%. And that seems pretty accurate. This graph only shows crime percentages from 2020 to 2023, and with a graph that would show 1970s all the way through the 2025, I'm sure there would be a higher changes in the statistics and would have more data for us to work off of. So the person that I picked for this case study who committed indecent exposure was a man named Eric Williamson in 2009 in Virginia. He was arrested for indecent exposure by being naked in front of his window as his wife was walking their child to school. Now, Eric claims that he likes just the freedom of being naked and walks naked in his house all the time. This was a interesting circumstance that he was caught at the window. So we don't know if he was walking to and from or if he was just standing there looking outside for the whole world to watch. Anyway, he was not found guilty because the jury concluded he did not do it intentionally, and also because they couldn't prove it was intentional. There is an importance of intent and recklessness with these types of crimes. There are several methods to prevent and address indecent exposure in the U.S. There could be stronger enforcement through the law. Laws about indecent exposure should be more strict and should be able to deter offenders more often. Each state has different laws and can range from fines to imprisonment. Educating the public is another good example. Public awareness campaigns about the consequences of indecent exposure can deter these acts. Awareness to the public can help victims report these types of crimes as well. Community vigilance. Teaching people that to stay alert and report more can help prevent indecencies. If more sexual offenders know about this, it can also double as a deterrence. Programs like Neighborhood Watch and law enforcement on patrol can effectively stop or slow down people exposing themselves. More surveillance, like more cameras, more lights on the street, anything so people can see oh, I might get caught if I do a crime. That's a good deterrence too. Security cameras can deter offenders and provide evidence for law enforcement. Knowing that there are more cameras in the vicinity can also deter offenders from that area. Stronger punishments, increasing penalties like repeat offenders can also deter, although there are studies that say even adding a death penalty as a deterrence method doesn't always improve crime rates, and I don't think that people who commit indecent exposure should be exposed to the death penalty. That just doesn't make any sense, but that's an example. And mental health support. Some people may have psychological issues, so allowing mental health resources and rehabilitation programs can be very useful and a fair way to deal with them. In conclusion, indecent exposure can be a very pervasive and complicated issue in the U.S., requiring law enforcement to take a higher stand and seeing that there are charges that are unfairly applied to some people, which should be amended. There are clearly acts that violate other rights, like flashing. There are still cases involving unintentional, non-sexual exposure, like public urination. This requires the law and justice system to find a new approach that goes over intent, location, and circumstances, and could help avoid unjust legal consequences for people, but at the same time punishing them, especially actual offenders that don't mean to do it unintentionally, by taking steps from above and educating the public's awareness, improving punishments and violations, and improving mental health support. The U.S. can have a more fair and effective method to stop and fixing indecent exposure. My 4 questions for my peers are: how would intent change indecent exposure laws? What if someone is lying about intent, and would the problem with determining what intent is in legal cases? Should public urination be indecent exposure when you're trying to do it privately, or should exceptions exist if there's a good reason for it? What are the legal differences in other countries about indecent exposure, and how are people prosecuted differently? Does increasing punishment deter offenders, or does it unnecessarily affect people charged with minor offenses or more? I do have citations and references for the pictures and the charts that I used. But anyway, indecent exposure is a very, complicated issue because some people don't mean to do it. Some people do it because their bladder's full and they just need to take a leak. And some people do it on purpose, and that's wrong. those people should be convicted with the highest extent of the law, go to jail, get help, mental health treatments. But for people who don't do it with the intent of harming someone or hurting someone or showing their privates to the world, that should be definitely amended, because there's a lot of wrongfully convicted people in jail because of that. Anyway, thank you. I have been Blake Christopherson, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation about indecent exposure.